the mistress demanded. The billionaire. Kick out his pregnant wife. She left but took every asset with her. From the outside, millionaire entrepreneur Jonathan Hardwick seemed to have it all: a sprawling mansion in the heart of Chicago's Gold Coast, a highly successful investment firm, and a devoted wife named Eliza, who was expecting their first child. But behind the polished veneer lay a brewing storm that would rip apart everything he'd built. Enter Vanessa Carter, Jonathan's stunning but cunning mistress, demanding he cast aside his pregnant wife to fully embrace their affair. Little did they know Eliza had her own secrets, and the resolve to protect her unborn baby at any cost. When betrayal clashes with determination, karma looms. Jonathan Hardwick had a singular fascination with win in business, win in life, and yes, even win in love. At just 42 years old, he had already amassed a considerable fortune through his real estate holdings, some shrewd technology investments, and a chain of high-end restaurants in major U.S. cities. His name came up frequently on most eligible bachelor lists before he wed Eliza Townsend Hardwick 5 years earlier. Eliza, a soft-spoken but poised woman, had inherited a family orchard in upstate New York. Though she possessed a quiet elegance, she was by no means naive. Since their marriage, Eliza had accompanied Jonathan to countless galas and networking events, skillfully projecting the image of a supportive spouse. Attendees often whispered among themselves that her calm presence provided a necessary counterbalance to Jonathan's charismatic, borderline arrogant persona. She was the grounding force that kept his feet on the ground, even as his ambitions soared. But for months, Jonathan's interest in their marriage had been waning. The cracks had begun small. He grew impatient with Eliza's suggestions. He prioritized late nights at the office over dinner at home, and he made decisions without consulting her. Eliza, pregnant with their first child, tried to rationalize his behavior. She reminded herself that Jonathan's empire was vast, that stress came with the territory, and that perhaps he just needed space. Little did she suspect how deep his betrayal ran. Vanessa Carter strutted into Jonathan's life 2 years prior, though Eliza only discovered her existence much later. With her impeccably styled honey-blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, Vanessa exuded a confident magnetism that entranced those around her. She first approached Jonathan at a charity auction in New York, where his donations had drawn public praise. She introduced herself as an aspiring interior designer, offering to send him her portfolio and pitch new concepts for his restaurant expansions. Though Jonathan had countless admirers in the city, Vanessa's allure stood out, bold and persistent. She followed up with daily emails, flaunting design sketches, and brimming with ideas for his next venture. Jonathan, flattered by her attention, invited her to dinner under the pretense of business collaboration. It was a textbook seduction, the late-night dinners to discuss color palettes, her subtle compliments about his achievements, the gentle hand that lingered on his arm whenever she laughed at his jokes. The details of that first clandestine night eventually blurred into many others, but under the glow of Manhattan's skyline, Jonathan found himself entranced by this woman who seemed to read his restless spirit and feed it exactly what it craved: adoration, excitement, a surge of risk and novelty. As time went on, Vanessa's role in Jonathan's life shifted from design consultant to secret lover. She saw Eliza as an obstacle, an outdated component in Jonathan's world, and she vowed to remove that obstacle once and for all. Eliza's pregnancy was not a spur-of-the-moment event. After 2 years of trying, she and Jonathan finally celebrated when a home pregnancy test revealed the result they'd long hoped for. She believed wholeheartedly that this child would bring them closer. Even if Jonathan's behavior had become distant in recent months, she clung to the hope that fatherhood would rekindle his dedication. As the months passed, however, Eliza felt her husband drift further away. Their once intimate evenings filled with laughter were replaced by solitary dinners. Jonathan's phone buzzed at odd hours, and he began keeping it face down or locked in a desk drawer. He wore a new cologne she hadn't seen in his collection, and sometimes returned home with faint traces of perfume clinging to his suit jacket. When she confronted him in gentle, careful words, Jonathan brushed her off with claims of exhaustion or business emergencies. Eliza considered confiding in her best friend, Rachel Snyder, a lawyer at Morgan & Associates, but she worried about straining her relationships or tarnishing Jonathan's name. For the sake of her unborn baby, Eliza tried to keep the peace. She told herself that once their child was born, Jonathan would settle down, focus on fatherhood, and remember the vows they made. But the cracks were growing. She could sense that her husband was no longer truly present. Vanessa Carter had grown impatient. Although Jonathan provided a lavish lifestyle, penthouse stays, extravagant jewelry from famed jeweler Harry Winston, and exclusive dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, she grew tired of remaining on the fringes. She loathed having to hide their relationship under a cloak of secrecy. The thrill of sneaking around had lost its luster, replaced by her craving for recognition. She wanted the world to know that Jonathan Hardwick was hers, and hers alone. In a fit of frustration, she confronted Jonathan in her luxury penthouse in Tribeca. The walls adorned with abstract art framed her anger as she paced back and forth in her 5-inch stilettos. Her voice trembled with the weight of an ultimatum she had rehearsed for weeks. "Jonathan, I don't want to be the other woman anymore. I've invested too much to continue lurking in the shadows. I want you to divorce Eliza. If you truly love me, like you say, prove it." Jonathan cornered, attempted to soothe her with half-promises. He whispered declarations that Eliza meant little to him, that their relationship had been dying for a long time, that he would eventually do the right thing. But Vanessa was past the point of sweet talk. Eventually isn't enough. She's pregnant, Jonathan. If you don't leave her now, you'll be tied to her forever. The words stung, but the truth was unmistakable. Vanessa demanded immediate, decisive action, and Jonathan, lust and pride swirling inside him, agreed to do the unthinkable. That fateful night in Chicago, Jonathan returned home at a late hour, his mind reeling from Vanessa's ultimatum. He found Eliza in the living room, lying on the couch reading a book about prenatal nutrition. She had dozed off, one hand absent-mindedly resting on her gently rounded belly. For a moment, Jonathan paused. The sight of his wife, vulnerable and full of a life he helped create, stirred an unexpected twinge of guilt. But Vanessa's voice lingered in his head. He'd made his choice, or so he believed. He woke Eliza with a gentle shake, though the conversation that followed was anything but gentle. Eliza noticed the coldness in his eyes before he even spoke. What came next felt like a dagger through her heart. "Eliza, this isn't working. I need you to leave. There's someone else, and we want to make a life together through shock and tears." Eliza struggled for clarity. "Jonathan, what are you saying? I'm your wife. We're expecting a baby. You can't just throw us aside." But Jonathan was resolute, or at least he forced himself to appear. So he cited irreconcilable differences, claimed their marriage had been over for months, and insisted she pack her things immediately. When he left the room, an echo of his footsteps sounded through the silent corridor. Eliza realized in that paralyzing moment that everything she thought she knew about her husband was a lie. Heartbroken and desperate, Eliza made one of the hardest calls of her life. She dialed Rachel Snyder, her longtime friend, and a savvy attorney at Morgan & Associates. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the Hardwick estate, a fierce determination glowing in her eyes. She wasted no time. "Eliza, we need to protect you, legally and financially. If Jonathan's truly gone off the deep end, we can't let him bully you out with nothing, especially with a baby on the way." Eliza, emotionally shattered, had never been one for legal battles, but she recognized this was no ordinary marital spat. Jonathan, wealthy as he was, could wipe her out if she didn't fight back. "I don't want revenge," Eliza murmured, her voice trembling. "I just need to ensure that our child has a secure future." Rachel nodded gently, squeezing Eliza's hand. She explained that under Illinois law, Eliza had significant rights. Marital assets, spousal support, and child support would be on the table, especially given Jonathan's net worth. Even if Jonathan's head was turned by his mistress, the law would not let him sever ties so callously. Unknown to Jonathan, Eliza quietly authorized Rachel to file for legal separation. More importantly, they mapped out strategies to track Jonathan's assets, freeze joint accounts, and compile evidence of adultery. Eliza might have been shocked and vulnerable, but she was no fool. She had a baby to protect. In the days that followed, Eliza concealed her legal maneuvers with deftness that belied her grief. She moved about the mansion, packing her things slowly, while Rachel coordinated behind the scenes. The staff, sympathetic to her heartbreak, provided discreet assistance. Through whispered conversations and hushed phone calls, Eliza learned that Jonathan's finances were more complex than she realized. He owned shell companies in Delaware, multiple properties under corporate names, and various offshore accounts. But as his spouse, she held a direct interest in these assets, even if she never realized it before. Jonathan, for his part, seemed eager to expedite her departure. He avoided being in the same room with her for more than a few minutes, rarely meeting her eyes. When asked about their future child, he offered cold, dismissive remarks. "I'll handle child support. Just leave it felt like a nightmare." But Eliza clung to her newfound sense of purpose. She had no choice but to protect herself and her unborn baby. In the quiet hours of the early morning, she would lie awake, hands cradling her stomach, whispering assurances to her child. Despite the betrayal, she would find a way to survive this. She would find the strength to hold on to what truly mattered, even if it meant walking away from the life she once cherished. Vanessa Carter reveled in her supposed victory. She had demanded that Jonathan remove Eliza from the picture, and he had complied, or so she believed. Daily she called to check on Jonathan's progress. "Has she left yet? Did she sign any divorce papers? When can I move in? We need to start redecorating," she insisted, her tone laced with impatience and excitement. Jonathan, torn between guilt and the thrill of his new life, reassured her time and time again. "She's almost out. It's just a matter of time before we're officially together." Meanwhile, he struggled with the complicated legal mess that Rachel Snyder was quietly orchestrating. He hadn't yet realized the extent of Eliza's counsel, or the legal ramifications of being unfaithful. He believed in his heart that he could simply pay Eliza off. Brush aside the marriage and begin anew with Vanessa. Vanessa, however, was a woman who saw her future through the lens of interior design, glitzy social circles, and climbing the rungs of elite society. She wanted to revel in being Mrs. Hardwick, enjoy the lavish parties, and rub elbows with Chicago's high society. She had waited long enough in her mind, and now the prize was within arm's reach. She even hinted at the idea of wanting a child someday, an idea that Jonathan found startling given the way he had just treated Eliza, but Vanessa's hold over him was strong, fueled by his desire to keep her satisfied. The day came when Eliza, with her suitcases packed, stood at the grand marble entrance of the Hardwick mansion, her eyes brimming with tears. She would not bow to humiliation, but the sorrow was inescapable. Rachel stood beside her, a silent pillar of support. 2 security guards employed by Jonathan hovered awkwardly in the background. Jonathan approached with a mixture of relief and discomfort. Perhaps some part of him felt regret at the spectacle his pregnant wife, once the woman he claimed to love, standing outside their home, exiled by his own decree. But Vanessa's ultimatum had forced his hand. He believed himself locked into his mistress's demands, too proud to see any alternative. After a cursory goodbye, he withdrew. No final embrace, no final apology, only a promise that she would be taken care of financially. Eliza climbed into the black SUV that Rachel had arranged. As they drove off, she watched the mansion recede in the rear-view mirror. She reminded herself, there's no turning back now. Yet she also quietly recited the plan Rachel had spent weeks refining, a plan that would guarantee Eliza, left not as a helpless victim, but as a woman wielding her rightful share of the Hardwick fortune, and more. In the calm aftermath of leaving the mansion, Eliza stepped into a new life she hadn't chosen, but one she would manage on her own terms. She moved temporarily into a luxurious penthouse in downtown Chicago, one that Rachel had secretly arranged for her through a trust they had established months earlier. This trust, funded through discreet withdrawals from the couple's joint accounts, represented only a fraction of the assets Eliza was entitled to. While Jonathan congratulated himself on forcing Eliza out, Rachel's legal team worked tirelessly behind the scenes. They had discovered a multitude of questionable activities regarding Jonathan's finances, tax shelters, hidden bank accounts, and a staggering amount of property listed under ambiguous corporation names. With the evidence in hand, they prepared to file a legal claim that would freeze Jonathan's assets pending a divorce settlement. Eliza felt conflicted. Though she knew she needed to protect herself, the notion of taking everything was never her intention. Her primary goal was security for her and her unborn child. But as the days went on, as she replayed Jonathan's callous words and actions, her resolve hardened. If he wished to discard her and his unborn baby so easily, then he would pay the price for underestimating her. Meanwhile, the Hardwick empire was set to face a legal tempest that would shake Jonathan to his core. Within a week of Eliza's departure, Vanessa Carter made her triumphant arrival at the Hardwick mansion, dressed in designer clothes, and sporting an air of self-satisfaction. She ordered staff around and set her sights on turning the elegant interior into her personal playground. She planned to rip out paintings she deemed dated and redecorate the living room with flashy, modern designs that would impress her circle of friends. But she soon discovered that being the new mistress of the mansion did not instantly grant her the adoration and respect she craved. The long-term staff who had grown loyal to Eliza watched Vanessa with thinly veiled distaste. They remembered Eliza's kindness, how she knew each of them by name, how she took an interest in their families. Vanessa, on the other hand, barked orders without a hint of warmth. She didn't even bother learning their names, referring to them by their roles. Cook-maid driver Jonathan, eager to please his new partner, initially indulged her whims, writing large checks for renovations. He convinced himself he was building a new life, one free from the constraints of a marriage he deemed stale. Little did he realize that every extravagant expense, every unauthorized withdrawal of marital funds would fuel the legal case mounting against him. The sense of foreboding arrived quietly, like a drizzle that slowly builds into a thunderstorm. Jonathan had been temporarily blinded by lust and excitement, but as he began to receive legal notices from Rachel Snyder's office, he realized his situation was far from under control. The documents detailed Eliza's claims for divorce, spousal maintenance, child support, and a significant share of his assets. More than that, they highlighted evidence of his infidelity and misuse of marital resources. Documentation that would not reflect well on him. In court, Vanessa grew irritated each time Jonathan picked up the phone to argue with his lawyers or cursed under his breath about the mounting threats to his fortune. She felt she'd been promised a golden future. Now she sensed trouble that could derail her dreams. "What do you mean they're freezing your accounts?" she demanded one morning, her eyes wide with panic. "You said it'd be easy to make her sign divorce papers and walk away." Jonathan, phone pressed to his ear, rubbed his temples. "It's complicated, Vanessa," he replied, voice tight with frustration. "She's working with a top firm. They're challenging everything. We'll sort it out. But it might take time." Time was precisely what Vanessa didn't want to give. She had left behind her old apartment and pinned all her hopes on this new lifestyle. Now that the legal battles had begun, she questioned whether Jonathan could deliver on his promises. Despite the stress of a pending divorce and mounting legal drama, Eliza found moments of quiet peace in her penthouse. She decorated the spare bedroom as a nursery painting, the walls a soft shade of yellow. While it pained her to do it alone, she felt a surge of comfort each time she glanced at the miniature crib. This was for her child, her guiding light. Regular checkups with Dr. Hannah Reese, her obstetrician, confirmed the baby was healthy. Dr. Reese, noticing the strain on Eliza's face, advised her to minimize stress. Easier said than done, Eliza admitted. Yet she managed to cultivate a sense of acceptance, leaning on Rachel's unwavering friendship and her own inner fortitude. In quieter moments, Eliza allowed herself to reflect on how her life had unraveled so dramatically, but she also acknowledged how her once timid nature had transformed into something more assertive and protective. The divorce battle might be ugly, but it illuminated qualities within herself she never knew she possessed, gently stroking her belly. Eliza reminded the baby that they would thrive despite Jonathan's betrayal, perhaps even because of it. Sympathy and support flooded in from unexpected quarters. Word spread among high society circles about Jonathan's betrayal. Contacts, who had been merely acquaintances of Eliza, reached out with kind words and offers to help. Invitations for coffee or prenatal yoga emerged, providing her with a network that extended beyond her heartbreak. One such ally was Michael Sandoval, a philanthropic entrepreneur who had seen Eliza's volunteer work at children's hospitals around Chicago. He'd always admired her gentle spirit. When he heard rumors of Jonathan's affair, he invited Eliza to discuss potential partnerships in child-focused charities. At first, Eliza was hesitant, unsure of his motivations, but as they met in a public cafe, she realized his intentions were sincere. Michael believed in Eliza's potential to lead charity initiatives, particularly those supporting single mothers and vulnerable children. Though Eliza was not ready for a new romance, she discovered comfort in forging new friendships that reflected her own evolving identity. Her background in running the orchard back in New York, combined with her presence in charity events, gave her insights into project management and philanthropy. Gradually, she began to see that her future could include meaningful work, not just the remnants of a broken marriage. And so, while Jonathan tangled himself in legal nightmares, Eliza quietly built alliances that would carry her forward. The legal battles intensified, draining not only Jonathan's finances, but also his mental stability. He was forced to attend multiple court hearings, endure depositions, and provide extensive financial documentation. With each passing day, He realized the magnitude of what Rachel Snyder and her team had uncovered: his shell corporation's offshore accounts and clandestine property holdings were laid bare. The worst blow came when a judge froze key assets pending the final divorce outcome, halting further renovations and restricting Jonathan's lavish spending. Vanessa, whose lifestyle depended on Jonathan's bank account, found herself in a panic. She had expected a seamless transition into wealth and luxury. Instead, she found herself pacing in the newly half-renovated mansion. Credit cards declined at high-end boutiques. Her arguments with Jonathan escalated into shouting matches that echoed through the corridors. Their whirlwind affair was losing its sparkle now that financial pressure loomed. Jonathan snapped more often, snarling at staff, slamming doors, and storming out late at night to avoid confronting Vanessa's complaints. Sleep eluded him. He tossed and turned in the master bedroom. Ironically, the same bed he once shared with Eliza, haunted by regret and a creeping realization that the empire he built was teetering on the brink of disaster. In the midst of legal paperwork, Rachel Snyder's investigators made a startling find. Nestled within the records of one of Jonathan's lesser-known corporations, they discovered a secret trust named Hardwick Future Ventures. It wasn't the existence of the trust that shocked them. Many wealthy individuals have such entities. It was the amount deposited, an 8-figure sum. More intriguing was that the trust listed Eliza as a beneficiary. Though Jonathan had never disclosed this, according to the paperwork upon dissolution of marriage or the event of Jonathan's passing, the trust's assets would immediately transfer to Eliza. Eliza, perplexed, found herself in a swirl of emotions when Rachel brought her the news. Why had Jonathan set this up and never told her? Could it have been an act of goodwill or something more deceptive? Rachel speculated it might have been part of a complex financial strategy, possibly to shield certain assets from potential lawsuits or investors. Regardless of Jonathan's original intentions, the trust's existence meant one critical thing. Eliza had a much larger stake in Jonathan's empire than even he had realized. This set the stage for a major legal turning point, one that could sway the divorce in her favor, potentially leaving Jonathan with far less than he believed he'd retain. With money tight and their future uncertain, Vanessa's behavior became more volatile. She resented having to scale back her lavish expenditures. She scoffed at the idea of living without daily spa treatments and high-end shopping sprees, and she was furious that for all her maneuvering, she still wasn't wearing an engagement ring, not even close. One evening she confronted Jonathan just as he arrived home, exhausted from a court hearing that had gone poorly. "This is all your fault." She snapped, tears of frustration pooling in her eyes. "I gave up everything to be with you, and now I have nothing." Jonathan, equally frayed, lashed back. "You think I wanted this? You pressured me to throw Eliza out. You wanted this marriage destroyed. Now you're complaining because we're facing consequences. Maybe you should have thought of that before demanding I divorce the mother of my child." Vanessa's eyes flared with rage. She threatened to leave him to return to New York, to speak to the tabloids if he didn't fix this financial nightmare. The conversation ended in a deafening silence as Jonathan stormed off, slamming the door behind him. For the first time, he sensed the precariousness of relying on someone as mercurial as Vanessa, especially now that his life was unraveling. Meanwhile, Eliza was making steady strides in her new life. She felt a surge of empowerment each time she met with Rachel to strategize or sat down with Michael Sandoval to discuss charitable initiatives. Though the heartbreak still ached, she was channeling her energy into proactive steps. She enrolled in prenatal classes at Lake Shore Women's Center, where she met other expectant mothers who had faced their own struggles. some single, some married, but all determined to provide bright futures for their children. In that environment, Eliza found solace sharing tips on nutrition, newborn care, and emotional well-being. This supportive network became a sanctuary from the looming chaos of the divorce. As Eliza's belly grew, so did her determination. She read books on motherhood planned for the baby's arrival, and occasionally allowed herself to dream of a happier tomorrow. She wasn't naive about the challenges ahead, but she refused to be defined solely by Jonathan's betrayal. There was more to her story than this broken marriage. That realization ignited a quiet fire in her, fueling her will to stand her ground in the legal battles and secure justice not just for herself, but for the innocent life she carried. Finally, the day came for a pivotal court hearing that would shape the financial destiny of both Jonathan and Eliza. The tension in the packed courtroom was palpable. Jonathan sat at the defendant's table beside his own high-powered lawyer, Anthony Delgado, a man known for securing favorable settlements for the wealthy. Across the aisle, Eliza and Rachel Snyder braced themselves. Anthony Delgado launched into a defense, arguing that Eliza sought an unreasonable share of the assets, painting her as an opportunistic spouse. But Rachel countered with the methodical precision of a seasoned litigator. Piece by piece, she presented evidence of Jonathan's hidden accounts, shell corporations, and the Hardwick Future Ventures Trust. She introduced testimony from financial experts, verifying the scope of Jonathan's empire and the misrepresentation he had engaged in. The final blow came when Rachel emphasized Eliza's pregnancy and the emotional distress inflicted upon her by Jonathan's affair. She masterfully tied the moral dimension into the legal framework, arguing that Jonathan's actions demonstrated a willful disregard for the well-being of his spouse and unborn child. By the time Rachel finished, murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Jonathan glanced at Vanessa, who sat in the back row clad in a fur-lined coat and sunglasses, her expression taut with anxiety. It was clear that the facade Jonathan had cultivated all these years was crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. After hearing closing arguments, Judge Marianne Wilkins gave a stern lecture from the bench. She criticized Jonathan for gross irresponsibility and moral negligence toward his wife and child. Though she maintained professional composure, her words carried a scathing undercurrent that hinted at her personal contempt for his behavior. She ruled in Eliza's favor for immediate spousal support, child support, and access to key assets. Effective immediately, Jonathan was to provide Eliza with temporary monthly payments that were far higher than he had anticipated. Additionally, the judge ordered the liquidation of certain assets to secure an escrow account for Eliza and the baby. Finally, and most damning for Jonathan, the Hardwick Future Ventures Trust was recognized as legitimate marital property that would, upon the finalization of the divorce transfer, in large part to Eliza. Vanessa watched in horror as Jonathan's face reddened with humiliation. He tried to argue with his lawyer, but the gavel had already come down. There would be no further debate in that hearing. In a matter of minutes, everything Jonathan thought he could control slipped through his fingers. As the court adjourned, a media frenzy erupted outside. Cameras flashed, microphones jutted forward, each reporter hungry for a soundbite on the dramatic downfall of Jonathan Hardwick. For Vanessa, the humiliating scene in court was too much to bear. She felt betrayed by Jonathan's inability to salvage his fortune, which in her mind equated to a broken promise of luxury. That very evening she confronted him in the mansion, shouting accusations. "You lied to me. You said this would be easy. Now I'm stuck in a half-renovated house with no money and a scandal waiting to explode." Jonathan, worn down and furious, argued back. You wanted me to throw Eliza out. We did it your way. Now we're paying the price. Don't act like you're innocent. This was your plan as much as mine." Their screaming match escalated to the point where staff members trembled behind closed doors, afraid to intervene. By midnight, the mansion's interior was in disarray. Shattered vases, overturned chairs, the physical remnants of their toxic relationship. In a fit of rage, Vanessa packed her bags, hailed a car, and declared she was leaving Jonathan. Whether she truly intended to come back or not was unclear. But in the aftermath, Jonathan found himself alone in the echoing halls of a house that no longer felt like a home. As the legal saga roared on, Eliza's due date crept closer. Late one night, she awoke in her penthouse to sudden contractions. Anxiety and excitement vied for her attention as she phoned Rachel, who rushed to her side and then dialed an ambulance. Her hospital bag was already packed. Eliza had made sure to be prepared for this moment. Over the next several hours, Eliza labored in a private suite at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Memories of Jonathan tugged at her thoughts, but she focused on the present. The miracle of bringing life into this world. Rachel stood by her, offering calming words, and hand-holding through every contraction. Dr. Reese arrived, guiding Eliza through a surprisingly swift delivery. At sunrise, Eliza cradled a baby boy in her arms. Tears blurred her vision, though her heart felt more focused and certain than ever. She named him Theodore, Gift of God. In that instant, all the chaos with Jonathan, all the bitterness melted away. This was her son, innocent and untainted by the drama swirling in the adult world. She quietly vowed to give him the life he deserved, no matter what. As news of baby Theodore's birth spread, Jonathan wrestled with a tidal wave of emotions. Though he'd banished Eliza, the idea that he had a newborn son gnawed at his conscience. He found himself sitting alone in the once vibrant study, now a cold, unlit room staring at baby photos of himself from decades prior. In those images, he was an innocent child, cradled in his parents' arms, unaware of the complicated world that awaited him. Vanessa was gone, or so he believed. She'd disappeared without a trace, having taken a few valuables from the mansion, and leaving him with nothing but a bitter sense of failure. In the quiet darkness, Jonathan couldn't shake the thought that he'd sacrificed the best parts of his life. Eliza, the unborn child, on a whim and infatuation. Tormented by regret, he picked up his phone and opened Eliza's contact. The last message they'd exchanged was weeks ago, concerning a court date. He typed a few words, then deleted them. What could he say that would matter? Now, every apology felt insufficient. Finally, he settled on a brief text. "Congratulations on Theodore. If you'll allow me, I'd like to see him. Jonathan." He stared at the phone for minutes. No reply came that night. Nonetheless, the weight of his choices pressed on him like never before. In the weeks after Theodore's birth, Eliza encountered the joys and challenges of new motherhood, sleepless nights, frequent feedings, and the indescribable wonder of watching her baby's every breath. She felt a different sense of power now, as if motherhood had reshaped her into someone more confident, more focused. When she finally read Jonathan's text, she was torn. Part of her wanted to protect Theodore from a father who'd shown such reckless disregard for his family. Another part remembered that children need their parents, and despite everything, Jonathan was still Theodore's father, Eliza's therapist. Dr. Naomi Weinstein, who specialized in postpartum care, encouraged her to consider healthy boundaries. You can allow Jonathan some access if he's willing to be a genuine parent. But remember, it's up to him to earn your trust. she advised. Taking a deep breath, Eliza drafted a careful response. Theodore is well. I appreciate your interest. We can discuss visitation through our attorneys. The legal agreement will ensure everything is clear and safe. Eliza. She wasn't ready to open herself up to more heartbreak. But if Jonathan genuinely wished to be part of Theodore's life, he would have to abide by the rules she set. Within months, the divorce settlement was nearing completion. Jonathan's repeated missteps, hidden assets, and public scandal had severely damaged his reputation in the business world. Investors pulled out of his ventures, stockholders demanded new leadership in his corporations, and the restaurant chains began to suffer a PR crisis. Employees were leaving for more stable opportunities. Loans were called in. One by one, the once lucrative pieces of the Hardwick empire crumbled under the weight of legal fees and a tarnished public image. In a desperate bid to salvage something, Jonathan sold off his yacht, the penthouse in Manhattan, and multiple properties, yet the financial hemorrhage persisted. Meanwhile, Vanessa was spotted in New York, partying with a new circle of wealthy men, apparently unbothered by the wreckage she left behind. Rumor had it, she was dating a hedge fund manager twice her age, a man rumored to be even richer than Jonathan. Meanwhile, Eliza, with Rachel Snyder's guidance, secured a settlement that granted her majority ownership of the Hardwick Future Ventures Trust and other assets. She had more than enough resources to raise Theodore comfortably. Though she hadn't sought revenge, the outcome was a kind of poetic justice. Jonathan, who'd cast aside his pregnant wife at his mistress's urging, was left with only a fraction of his former wealth. To friends who marveled at her newly granted fortune, Eliza would say, "I'd give it all up to have had a faithful marriage. But it is what it is, and I have to move forward for Theodore's sake." 2 days before the divorce was officially finalized, Jonathan requested a face-to-face meeting with Eliza. He arrived at her penthouse in a subdued grey suit, a far cry from the flashy attire he once sported. When Eliza opened the door, she sensed the weariness in his eyes. Theodore, now a few months old, was asleep in a nearby bassinet. They sat across from each other in the living room, a space filled with soft pastel colors and baby toys. Jonathan struggled to find the words. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Eliza. For everything I know, sorry doesn't fix what I did. But I had to say it." Eliza studied him, her emotions tangled. "I appreciate that," she replied softly. "But apology or not, the damage is done. I have to think about Theodore first." Jonathan nodded, tears threatening to break. "I'd like to be part of his life, to help raise him. I understand if you hate me, but please don't punish him on my account." Eliza exhaled, shoulders tense. "We'll work something out through the lawyers. I won't deny Theodore a chance to know his father, as long as you respect boundaries and commit to being a positive presence." For a moment, they were both silent, grief-laden acceptance hanging in the air. Jonathan stood to leave. Outside, the wind carried the promise of a new beginning, though not the one he had envisioned. As the ink dried on the finalized divorce papers, Eliza felt an unexpected surge of relief. She was officially free from the entanglements of a marriage that had devolved into deceit. Ownership of substantial assets was now in her name, a turn of fate she'd never wished for, yet one that provided a stable foundation for her and Theodore. She returned to upstate New York to visit the orchard she'd inherited from her parents. Walking among the apple trees, she felt a sense of peace, remembering simpler days before. Wealth and betrayal overshadowed her life. The orchard manager, an old family friend named Donald Barnett, greeted her warmly, congratulating her on the baby and offering heartfelt sympathy for her troubles. The fresh air, the scent of ripe fruit, and the gentle hum of bees pollinating blossoms reminded her that life persisted, blooming even after devastating storms. Eliza toyed with the idea of revitalizing the orchard, expanding it into a community resource for organic produce and family-friendly events. She wanted her son to grow up with a sense of grounding and purpose, to appreciate the value of honest work and nature's rhythms. In that moment, she envisioned a future that was truly her own, unshackled from Jonathan's shadow. In the months that followed, Eliza embraced her role as a mother and an independent businesswoman. With a portion of her settlement money, she launched an initiative called Blooming Futures at the Orchard, a program designed to employ single parents and provide them with childcare and flexible schedules. The local community welcomed the idea, and soon the orchard was buzzing with new energy. Michael Sandoval visited frequently, helping to secure sponsorships from philanthropic organizations. Though they worked closely, Eliza kept the relationship professional. She needed time to heal, to figure out her path, without rushing into another romantic entanglement. Yet even as she devoted herself to blooming futures, Eliza discovered a renewed sense of self-worth blossoming within her. She was more than an ex-wife, more than a scorned spouse. She was a leader, a mother, a visionary. Whenever she looked at Theodore, his soft brown eyes wide with curiosity, she felt a love that transcended the bitterness of her past. In rare moments of reflection, she thought about the day Jonathan had pushed her out, how devastating it felt at the time. Now she recognized that moment as the catalyst that propelled her toward a more authentic life. Sometimes the darkest betrayals lead to the brightest transformations. As Eliza's new life flourished, Jonathan contended with his own reality check. He moved out of the mansion, which was ultimately sold to cover debts and legal fees. He settled into a modest condo on the outskirts of the city, an unremarkable building that offered none of the grandeur he once boasted. In financial straits, he took a job at a smaller investment firm. No longer the CEO of his own empire, old associates avoided his calls, worried that his tarnished reputation could drag them down. The tabloids had a field day analyzing the rise and fall of Jonathan Hardwick, scathingly pointing to his scandalous affair as the impetus for his downfall. Gone were the exclusive galas, the membership to the country club, the staff who attended to his every whim. Alone in the humdrum condo, Jonathan spent his evenings ruminating on what he'd lost. The only solace he found was during the sporadic court-approved visits with Theodore brief windows, when he could hold his son feed him or watch him gurgle with laughter. Though it pained him to see Eliza thriving, a small part of him felt proud of her accomplishments. Deep down, he knew he had forfeited the privilege of sharing in her success. This, he realized, was the cruel but fair karmic retribution for the choices he'd made. Months later, just as Jonathan was beginning to accept the quiet rhythm of his diminished life, a familiar face appeared in his condo lobby. Vanessa Carter, clad in designer clothes, looking every bit the social climber she'd always been. She offered a coy smile. She claimed her New York fling had fizzled out, that she realized she'd made a mistake, leaving Jonathan in his hour of need. Though a flicker of old desire stirred in Jonathan, he remained wary. He remembered the screaming matches, the shattered vases, the insults. If he'd learned anything from the fiasco of the past year, it was that Vanessa had played a significant role in his downfall. She had stoked his ego, fanned the flames of his dissatisfaction, and demanded he discard Eliza Vanessa, however insisted she'd changed. She wanted to help him rebuild his life, standing by his side. She even suggested marriage. But Jonathan, for once, resisted the lure of her words. "I lost everything chasing after you," he told her eyes, fixed on the cheap linoleum floor. And once it was gone, you left me too." Her expression hardened. "It's not my fault you couldn't handle your own life, Jonathan." She sneered. "I offered you love and excitement. You're the one who messed up with that." The conversation devolved into blame and bitterness. Vanessa stormed out, leaving Jonathan in the lobby, feeling strangely liberated. He'd escaped her grasp at last. For Eliza, life continued to be a mix of baby giggles, orchard projects, and philanthropic endeavors. Rachel Snyder remained a close friend, sometimes joking that she'd never had a client more deserving of a happy ending. Michael Sandoval's partnership proved fruitful, bringing in more grants and donors to the Blooming Futures initiative. Word spread throughout the region about Eliza's orchard, how it served as both a beacon of employment for single parents and a delightful place for families to spend their weekends. On a crisp autumn day, as customers roamed the orchard, plucking ripe apples from the trees, Eliza held Theodore close. He reached out to grab a leaf, his tiny fingers curling around the vibrant color. She smiled, recalling how uncertain her life had been when she was forced to leave Jonathan's mansion. Now she felt a deep gratitude for the second chance she'd been given. Yes, she had money. Yes, she had security. But most importantly, she had a purpose. In the distance, she saw a group of children laughing as they tried to catch fallen leaves. She whispered to Theodore, "This is our life now, and it's beautiful." In that moment, she knew she would never trade her hard-earned peace for anything else in the world. One day, an unexpected visitor showed up at the orchard gates. Jonathan, nervous and visibly downcast, he asked the staff if he could speak with Eliza. She emerged from the barn, wearing casual jeans and a flannel shirt. Her cheeks flushed from overseeing a children's activity. When their eyes met, Jonathan's regret poured out in a single tear. "I was in the area," he mumbled. I'm sorry to drop by, unannounced. I've just been thinking a lot about Theodore. I wanted to see if I could spend a little time with him." Eliza paused, glancing at the orchard bustle around them. She considered telling him to schedule a visit through legal channels, but something in his tired gaze, raw honesty, perhaps, softened her. She nodded slowly. "He's with Rachel near the petting zoo. Let's go together." Jonathan followed, weaving through the orchard, the laughter of families echoing in the crisp air. Eliza watched him, noting how out of place he looked in his worn business attire. For a fleeting moment, she recalled the charm that once attracted her to him. People change, she reminded herself. But not all transformations bring healing. Still, Theodore deserved a chance to know his father in some measure. And if Jonathan was genuine this time, perhaps that would be enough. Jonathan spent the afternoon pushing Theodore in a stroller, watching his wide-eyed curiosity at the orchard's sights and smells. Rachel, ever watchful, hovered nearby in case tensions rose. But the air remained surprisingly calm. Eliza observed Jonathan's interactions with the baby, gentle, cautious, perhaps even loving. It was a side of him she hadn't seen in a long time. When evening rolled around, Jonathan prepared to leave. Hesitating, he turned to Eliza. "Thank you for letting me come. It means more to me than you know." She nodded, struggling to reconcile her lingering hurt with compassion. "You're still his father, Jonathan. That won't change. I just hope you understand that my life, our life, is different now." He looked around at the orchard, its apple-laden trees shimmering in the waning light. "This place suits you," he said softly, glancing at Theodore one last time. "I'm happy for you, Eliza." Though she couldn't quite bring herself to smile, she felt a sense of equilibrium settling. Maybe forgiveness was too big a leap right now, but acceptance seemed possible. As Jonathan's figure disappeared down the path, Eliza breathed in the orchard air. She reminded herself she was no longer the timid wife clinging to a fantasy of marital bliss. She was stronger now, and free news circulated that Jonathan had filed for personal bankruptcy. Vanessa Carter was nowhere to be found. Former acquaintances whispered rumors of her presence at exclusive parties in Monaco, drinking champagne on the yacht of some European billionaire. Meanwhile, Jonathan's name gradually faded from the headlines, replaced by fresher scandals and more current gossip. His downfall was complete. For Eliza, the orchard thrived, and blooming futures expanded with every passing season. She hired more single parents, offered educational programs, and started partnering with local colleges to provide interns with hands-on agricultural experience. Theodore grew learning to toddle through rows of apple trees, sometimes giggling with delight when he recognized the orchard cat lazing in the sunshine. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale. Eliza still wrestled with sleepless nights, particularly on days Theodore fell ill or when orchard business faced unforeseen challenges, but each trial felt manageable compared to the toxic chaos she'd left behind. She had found her own brand of happiness, built on authenticity, community, and unconditional love for her child. In a sense, karma had touched everyone involved. Jonathan lost his empire, Vanessa lost her easy ride, and Eliza found a new path illuminated by her inner strength. If that wasn't the embodiment of a real-life drama novel, nothing was years slipped by. Theodore, now a curly-haired toddler with bright eyes, helped his mother place colorful flags around the orchard for a harvest festival. The orchard had become a renowned venue for seasonal events, apple picking in the fall cider, tastings, even a yearly harvest concert. Blooming Futures had taken root, aiding hundreds of single parents with stable employment daycare facilities and a community of support. Occasionally, Jonathan visited, though the visits were scheduled in advance and brief. He had never regained his former financial status, but he'd found a more humble livelihood working as a consultant for small businesses. The once mighty mogul had discovered the harsh reality that trust and integrity were essential in building a lasting reputation. Still, he cherished the limited time he spent with Theodore, recognizing that fatherhood was a privilege he'd nearly forfeited. As for Eliza, her life had taken on an unexpected richness. She was approached by a publisher to write a memoir about her experiences, part cautionary tale, part inspirational story. Though hesitant at first, she began jotting down her thoughts in quiet moments, weaving in lessons learned from heartbreak and perseverance. When she looked at where she was versus where she'd been, she could hardly believe the transformation. Once exiled from her marital home by a husband and his mistress, she now stood at the helm of a thriving business and a blossoming personal life. And in that realization, she found the peace and purpose she had long sought. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster journey of love, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. Eliza Townsend. Hardwick's story reminds us that heartbreak can shatter our world, but with courage and resilience, we can emerge even stronger, forging a path lit by self-discovery and purpose. Her trials brought her face to face with deceit and adversity, but also revealed untapped strengths within her. In the end, she not only reclaimed her life, but found success and peace beyond her wildest dreams. If this tale resonated with you, please show your support, like this video. Share it with friends who appreciate a gripping real-life drama, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories of triumph, heartbreak, and everything in between. Your engagement helps us bring you more extraordinary content. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community.